Hello, I'm Brett Nelson, the director at Sly Park Outdoor Education Center. We're excited that you'll be participating in the lesson Creek Ecology with Grizzly and Timber.
Hey everybody, Grizzly and Timber here up at the Sly Park Environmental Education Center. We're going to take you on a little adventure today down in the Park Creek Canyon, where we're going to do a scientific investigation on a riparian ecosystem.
And to help guide that investigation, we've got some science goals we'd like you to follow along with as we head on down the trail. Here they are. Number 1, figure out what biotic and abiotic features make up the Park Creek Canyon and the creek's riparian ecosystem. Number 2, figure out how we collect data on the health of the creek using our observation skills and some simple scientific equipment. And number 3, think about how we can use that data to identify human impacts on a riparian ecosystem.
So field scientists are constantly making observations, and they're zooming in to look at those little things in nature. And then they zoom out to see how those little things can fit in the bigger picture. So although you're not here with us on the trail today, go ahead and make some observations along this journey and think about how you can conduct a scientific investigation in your community. So let's head on down the trail.
All right. So you might have noticed Grizzly making some observations as he made his way down the trail. Observations are a great first step into any investigation because observations lead to questions and questions lead to discoveries, both big and small. So as we go on down the trail from this point onwards, I want you to start making your own observations. What do you notice in the forest? Do you hear anything? Do you see any patterns? What stands out to you?
All right, so think about some of your observations that you've made thus far. Do they fit into any big categories? As field scientists, we're constantly observing features in the forest that fit either into two categories of living or non-living. And two ways that scientists describe these things are living as biotic and non-living as abiotic.
Scientists, there's so many different ways you can organize all of your observations or record them. One really easy way to do that is to create a T-chart to organize your thoughts. Now, on one side of that T-chart, you can put what you notice, and on the other side of that T-chart, you can put what you wonder. And now we can start to categorize those things as either biotic or abiotic. We'll give you a moment to make your own T-chart before we head down the trail.
As I hiked down the trail, I noticed the incense cedar needles and thought it would be a good idea to zoom in and take a closer look. While making an observation, I wondered why the needles form in segments. The incense cedar tree is a living thing, so I put it in the biotic category. While using binoculars to look for birds, I noticed the tops of the trees were moving around due to the wind moving up the canyon. I wondered how that might affect birds and how they choose a location to build a nest. Wind is a non-living thing, so I put it in the abiotic category. So let's continue down into the canyon and make some more observations, and feel free to share them with others.
Nice, check out this black oak tree leaf. It's totally decomposing. It's got a lot of holes in it, it's lost all of its pigmentation, but you can easily see the veins of the leaf. Black oak trees have some of the biggest leaves that drop.
Kind of that zoom in and zoom out. Getting it close up.
Grizz, you see that one over there?
Where?
Just over there. Check it out.
Oh, nice.
I think that might be a pileated.
Yeah. Largest woodpecker we have in this forest.
Nice.
So as you look at the different biotic and abiotic observations you've made thus far in the canyon, take a little bit closer look and think about how they're connected in different ways. This is called interdependence, where you have abiotic and biotic things interacting together. That makes up an ecosystem.
Exactly. And an example of that interdependence might be, for example, the lichen growing on this branch of the Douglas fir tree above us. Lichen's actually two organisms growing symbiotically, a fungus and an algae. But these are all examples of interdependence in a mixed conifer forest ecosystem. As you're thinking about this idea of interdependence, can you think of a place that you've been to, maybe a park or a trail that can be considered an ecosystem? What are some of the parts of that ecosystem? How are they connected? Can you hear any evidence of another ecosystem nearby? Because we're about to go explore one.
That's not the roar of the ocean, and that's definitely not wind. That's Park Creek that we hear.
Now, as we head on down to the creek on our last leg of the journey, I want you to try and predict any of the abiotic or biotic things that we might find down there, because we're about to explore a completely different ecosystem, the riparian zone of Park Creek.
Welcome to the Park Creek Riparian Zone. Riparian zones are transitional areas between land and water, including the margins of streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. So now that we've made observations down into the canyon, and we've predicted what we might find down here at the creek, we need to come up with a simple question. How can we investigate the creek?
Now remember, observations lead to questions, and questions lead to discoveries. So what is it that we want to discover? You might have a lot of questions right now about the creek and the habitat we see, but one question that Grizz and I often ask when we get down here is, how healthy is this creek?
To figure out the health of the creek, we need to collect some data, or simply information. We're going to be using some basic methods and scientific equipment to collect benthic macroinvertebrates, otherwise known as BMI.
Whoa, Grizz, what did you just say? Benthic macroinvertebrates? Benthic, that means bottom dwelling. Macro means it can be seen with the human eye. And invertebrate means it doesn't have a backbone, right?
Right. You might be wondering about how we're going to collect these critters in the creek. We like to keep it simple here at Sly Park. We use some super basic methods and equipment that can be used at any of your local waterways, like a river, pond, lake, or wetland.
First, we need to look at the creek and locate any potential different types of habitat. Can you see any different types of habitat in the creek? A riffle is part of a stream with a fast, shallow flow over boulders and cobbles, which breaks the water surface. A run is a smooth part of the stream with fast water and little or no turbulence. A run in a stream connects a riffle and pool areas. And a pool is a part of a stream with slow-moving, deep water.
Before we jump in though, it's important to note that field scientists like to familiarize themselves with where they're going to be collecting information, where they're going to be out there conducting a scientific investigation. And so as we sit here, we're going to take a look at this creek and try to find any spots that might present a hazard, some sort of a safety hazard. I can see the water flowing, and I can also see a lot of slippery surfaces out there.
But after checking it out, Grizz, I'm thinking I see a good spot over there. Let's go dive in.
Let's go.
What do you notice about the water of the creek, the rocks and the vegetation in and around the water? Refer back to your Tchart and continue to document your observations. Are the things you're seeing biotic? Are they abiotic? Are there any connections between the two?
As we zoom in to observe the macroinvertebrates in greater detail, take notice of the various body parts, also called structures. What do you notice about the insect's body? Do they have an exoskeleton? Do you notice any patterns? Compare and contrast the various structures and think about how they help that insect survive in this riparian ecosystem. Think about this, how those structures help the insect move in the creek, how they might evade predators or get their food. Answers to these questions provide evidence for how energy and matter flow in this system.
This riparian ecosystem is filled with all sorts of interdependent relationships. For example, these mayfly larvae were eating decomposing leaves underwater. Can you see any other examples of interdependence?
What happens if the ecosystem changes? How would that affect the BMI and the relationships we're observing? Can you think of any changes that could affect the creek ecosystem?
So now let's take a moment to zoom out and look at the data that we've just collected. How we interpret this data is important because we can use it as evidence to support our understanding of the health of the creek.
Benthic macroinvertebrates are considered an indicator species. The presence, abundance, or absence of an indicator species reflects a specific environmental condition. And the BMI in this creek, they're thriving due to high oxygen levels and cold water temperatures.
Can you think of some ways that human activities might have an effect on indicator species within a riparian ecosystem?
Now think about a local waterway, maybe a pond, a creek, or a river somewhere near you in your community. Can you think of any human impacts that might affect the indicator species in that place? If you could conduct your own investigation of a local creek or waterway near you, how could you use your findings to make a positive impact on the world around you?
Well, that's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us on this adventure down into the Park Creek Canyon. And remember to keep sharing those observations with others. And most importantly, when you zoom in, you see those little things, but be sure to zoom out so that you get that big picture.